Good evening from the IAA Malaysia studios. Live from Kuala Lumpur, it's Thursday Night Live. Good evening to those in the same time zone as Malaysia and thereabouts. Good morning and good afternoon to the rest of the world. Welcome to the IAA Malaysia webinar series with the theme Why Brands Matter. Today's webinar is the second in a three-part series, the first of which was held in late October. Now, brand plays a critical role in fueling economy through innovation, creativity, and optimism. Brands convey the source, the quality, the authenticity of products and services while representing pride, trust, passion, choice, and identity. The importance of brands increases during times of crisis. Strong brands strengthen consumer confidence, leading to increase in consumer spending, thereby assisting to rebuild a better economy. This evening, we have with us esteemed panelists from diverse sectors who will provide real-world views and insights. Allow me to introduce them. First, Adam Wee, former Group Chief Marketing Officer, Maybank and CIMB.
Hi, thanks for having me here, Prabha.
John CHACKO, Adjunct Professor, UiTM Faculty of Communications and Media Studies, President IAA Malaysia, Vice President IAA Education, IAA World Board, and Chairman 46th IAA World Congress 2022.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me.
Next we have AZRANI RUSTAM, Director, Corporate Affairs and Communications at JTI.
Thanks. Hi.
And RUDY, Chief Brand Officer at AirAsia Group.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Gentlemen, welcome. John, let me put you in the hot seat first.
Oh wow, okay.
As it should be.
Over 25 years in marketing around the world, with top-of-mind brands like Kraft and Coca-Cola, must have exposed you to diverse cultures and preferences among consumers. What are the universal values that drive consumers to embrace legendary brands, John?
Okay, well, actually it's 35 years, but I'm glad you said 25, makes me feel younger. Make me feel and look like Rudy. Right? Values, they begin with emotions, right? And values are things that you stand for, the things that guide you in what you do, what you say, and how you act. So they are fundamental, and if you look at how companies like, let's take an example of the Coca-Cola company, only because I have a history with them, is that, I mean, they are grounded in their value of optimism and positivity. And you'll find that they're relentless on those values. Regardless of what is happening around the world, they're relentless with positivity and optimism, which is great values which connect with the consumer. Times have changed. Things have changed. The catastrophe that we've had over the last year and before that has made people rethink their priorities. This race for materialism, for wealth, for recognition, that just pales into insignificance when we consider that survival is such an important priority to people right now. So things have changed, and likewise, sometimes we got to relook at some of the values that can connect with consumers, right? Now, some of the things that really matter to consumers, regardless of where you are in the world. Now, the manifestation of this may be different depending on socioeconomic factors, but at the core, the things that really matter to people are things like what's happening to our climate, what's happening to our planet, what's happening to nature, what's happening to humanity. Even diversity and inclusion is becoming things that are really important. So, and the future of humanity. So I think brands have to start adapting to those important elements, right, in their values as well. So brands that truly show that they care, and I mean truly show they care, brands that will stand by the consumer in times of crisis and in all times. Brands that respect consumers' privacy and respect consumers, including their privacy. And brands that are really interested in the well-being of consumers, and also take a stance on what matters. That's important. Take a stance on what matters. Not just sit on the sidelines and wait to see what other brands will do. Be brave and have a conviction to your values and take a stand. Now, those are fundamental values that will drive consumers closer to your brand. Okay? Brands that are willing to recode their reason for being along the lines of these values will actually connect better with consumers. So regardless of where you are in the world, fundamentally what's important to consumers have changed. And you really need to be close to that and ensure that your brands connect with that.
Thank you, John. Interesting. I picked up the phrase or the word emotion or emotions that you mentioned, which I think AirAsia has actually explored quite a bit over the years in its communications. Rudy, I've got a question. Okay, in this pandemic, okay, despite extreme care taken to conserve cash, we see AirAsia embarking on several CSR initiatives. I think that's a good story. How will these activities exist in the brand ecosystem of AirAsia?
That's a good question, actually. I think for AirAsia, we've always been a people-centric brand. It's in the name itself in terms of our tagline, now everyone can fly. And just more recently, this past year, despite the pandemic, we've also relaunched our platform as Azure.com with the tagline for everyone. So in and out of the entire Azure brand, whether it's internally or externally to the people we communicate to, people is always at the center of everything we do. And hence, when it comes to CSR efforts as well, even in the past when we had to assist the likes of Philippines when there were the hurricanes and all that, even for this year when we had to help people in Sabah and so on and send food over, we felt, at least as a brand, that's something that's inherent in what we do and who we are. And just because there's a pandemic and we're suffering as a brand doesn't mean that we shouldn't be helping people, because it's part and parcel of who we are. So why change? I think it's very similar to what was mentioned just now in terms of kind of coding yourself as your brand to kind of fit the needs of the different people across the region as well, right? So for us, that code is always there in terms of our value, and then how we kind of shift it a little bit around to serve the needs of the people, we adjust according to that. Yeah.
Interesting. Really, I caught on to, you mentioned about helping people has been key. This, it doesn't matter on the occasions or how the industry is doing, but people come first, which is very much part of AirAsia's credo. Talking about helping people, Adam, reports in the business media say that the extension of the loan moratorium on targeted categories may hurt the financials of banks. However, how does this measure rub off on the bank's brand in understanding the plight of its clients, helping people basically?
Thanks for the question, Prabha. I think we have to look at the moratorium itself and the context behind the moratorium. And I say this to mean two things, two areas possibly. One is topical moratorium, and the other one is a blanket moratorium, which we have actually experienced through this MCO.
Yep.
So it's nationwide. So all banks are doing it for the customers. So in this case here, I think in terms of its rub-off towards the brand equity, it's fairly nominal, because consumers are in a crisis state and they expect this. So they feel that they are entitled to a lot of help from the government and a lot of help from banks. So they feel it almost like an obligation that the banks are forced to do, basically. Not that the banks don't want to do it, because in typical cases of crisis, banks usually do help customers as well. I mentioned topical moratorium.
Yes.
And that usually happens when there are certain areas that are affected by crisis, like during floodings in Kelantan or in Johor, things like that. So on a special case basis for customers who are affected by this, usually the banks do give moratorium as well, right? So that has been going on for a long time amongst most banks as well. And that one actually has a lot more rub-off effect on the brand credibility or the brand equity in that sense.
Okay.
So I think we have to distinguish that, because there's no differentiation in doing the moratorium now for all banks because of the pandemic. Now, when there are cases where there is a little bit of difference and you take the initiative to step up front first for the customers, then doing such things will probably have a better rub-off effect on the brand equity itself.
Okay. AZRANI, talking about the price point and talking about the timing, economic crisis, some people may wish to go and tighten their belts. Okay, when it comes to the tobacco category, now some say that subject to income levels and demographics, price point is a major factor in one staying with a particular tobacco brand, many presume. Is this fact, or does the premise, that's my brand, trying?
Well, to a large extent, it is. I mean, and I think in any category as well, price, and particularly when it comes to periods where there's economic uncertainty, price will be definitely a factor to a lot of people. But at the same time, it's also a balancing act, and I think in the psyche of consumers, they definitely want to have the balance of between price and the quality, and that's what brands bring. Because with brands, as we mentioned just now, it's about the passion, quality, the trustworthiness, and the understanding that a particular product or a particular brand would have gone through such a rigor in terms of production, and people will know that this is something that they want. Certainly, I mean, in the case of for tobacco, I mean, there's always that tipping point, that point where people will try to continuously find value. And I think where I come from, in the Malaysian context, we have a high level of illegal trade in the market. And this is something that is, it's a bit of a slippery slope situation where brands or legal categories will be impacted by things like regulation or illegal trade. People will then shift into going into this illegal segment, and that doesn't help. And we're talking here today about how brands would impact and support economies. That has its own unintended consequences when people go into an unregulated category. So to a large extent, price plays a factor, to answer your question, definitely. But still, people are going to be looking at the brands and what they can trust in.
So you mentioned something about trustworthiness in a brand. Okay, so let me put this to you. Okay, now there have been calls in Malaysia to migrate to plain packaging, which Australia embarked upon in 2012. Okay, does this infringe on the consumer's right to choose a brand? Because you mentioned about trustworthiness in a brand. All of us here, we pick certain brands because we trust the brand. Yeah. Okay.
Definitely. It's one thing that it infringes the right to choose. It infringes the right of a brand owner to actually innovate. But more importantly, it is a measure that carries no benefit whatsoever towards the intention of what governments may want to do, and particularly in the category of tobacco. Certainly governments are looking at measures to try to reduce consumption. But some of these, in particular, this measure that has been in Australia, in the UK, it's pretty draconian. It's pretty, adverse. It's pretty, so advanced in such a way that it has not actually worked. Consumption hasn't actually declined. In the case of Australia, it was a expectation that there would be a further decline in terms of tobacco consumption, but there was no acceleration of the consumption. It didn't accelerate, the decline even faster. What has happened is that products, branding has been taken away, generic packaging has come into play, and other things have come, other issues have cropped up. In particular, where these products now have been made easier to copy. In certain jurisdictions like France, for example, there's been an increase in counterfeiting of products, tobacco products. And that itself creates a problem, because when you have an increasing unregulated segment or market, or where counterfeiting actually happens, then it creates all sorts of other issues. And if I might just add, in the case of Malaysia, where we are now, we have a high level of illegal trade, and most of that, and all of that is actually contraband, where taxes are not paid for. But we do not have any counterfeiting.
Now, could you imagine if we have a measure such as plain packaging here? It just provides a blueprint for copying to actually happen. And you know, the anticipation and I think the belief is that we will have a bigger problem in terms of the illegal segment if we have plain packaging in Malaysia.
See, this is quite different when it comes to the alcohol, when it comes to spirits, because there's you can find counterfeit products on the market. You see, and sometimes even to the most loyal, if you're most loyal to a brand, it's quite difficult to go and tell one from the other.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're talking about trustworthiness, Adam. Okay, there were days when people used to stay with one financial institution all their lives. Like if I'm with Bank A, okay, that's it. Availing themselves of products and services only from that particular brand. However, now from credit card to hire purchase to home loan, for example, that single financial institution brand in one's life is almost non-existent. Why is this?
I think it's largely due to fragmentation of product offering. I think that's one of the biggest evolution that you would see in the banking sector. Many years ago, banking products were very simple. There's probably one or two types of saving products, one or two types of current accounts that you can open, and very limited choices in terms of the loan products that you could apply for. But it has actually ballooned quite a fair bit. If you go to any bank per se and actually look at the products that they offer on deposit products alone, the more established banks will probably have up to 70, 80 products listed, just deposit products alone. Now that fragmentation has created a lot of choices. And imagine the entire market having various choices of products with slightly different sort of propositions, slightly different sort of benefits, and it actually creates a different sort of consideration environment for the banking sector, which used to be quite basic. And this stems from the life stage you're in as well, right? So those days, yeah, you can say that you stay with one bank for a long time because you really only need a deposit account, right? But now, you also switch your job very rapidly. So when you switch your job, your salary account goes with whichever company you're with, right? And that becomes your new operating account. But you don't necessarily relinquish your old bank account as well. So you end up keeping multiple bank accounts. And then you're being upsold new products in the new banking relationships as well. So I mentioned life stage plays a very important role in this loyalty as well, because at the early stage of your life stage, you will probably have very basic needs. You need just a deposit account. But as you progress on and you start to have your young family, you want to buy a home, then you start to need a home loan, and then you want to buy a car as well. So you're into the second stage of relationship with the brand or the banks, right? And it gets further up and you're a lot more engaged with the banks as you go up to the area of making credit card choices, because the credit card choices enables you to actually fulfill your lifestyle. You travel with it, you buy your luxury goods in it. So you just have a higher affinity towards that. So credit card has always driven brand choice of which bank you choose in the banking sector. And that's why you see that for a lot of banks, it's one of those areas where banks heavily promote the card proposition quite a fair bit and work on the merchant deals, etc., to give the best kind of proposition and value to customers. So because of that fragmentation, you find that customers may not necessarily be loyal to one bank, but will probably have multiple banking relationships. And it's not necessarily bad for business for the banks either, because there's a lot more banking products being consumed at the same time, right? And the last level is actually more towards the affluent market, where you actually have a little bit more personal relationship expectations with your relationship manager. And this is in the area of wealth management, when banks need to actually position themselves as a financial advisor, a trusted financial advisor. And that's actually the hardest position for banks to get to. Now, when you can get to that stage, then you actually have a far more entrenched loyalty with the bank itself. Because you don't easily change your relationship manager because you spend that time to establish that trust. Yeah. So it's contextual, but it's largely driven by this fragmentation that has happened in the marketplace.
Adam, now we're talking about credit cards and say it drives spending, you see. How would a bank decide on a co-branding of a credit card, you see? For example, you have Standard Chartered with, for example, Liverpool or CIMB with, another established company.
Or Maybank with Manchester United at one time, right? I think it's the commercial opportunity that is present that defines that relationship of the co-branded card.
Okay.
So it's basically looked at as a business proposition. So if you have a brand that's actually of high interest to the consumers and have a large base of following, I think at one time when Maybank was doing the Manchester United co-branded card, officially or unofficially, I think if I can recall, we probably had a fan base of about 2 million in Malaysia or something like that for MU fans. And we felt that that was a good proposition at that time for us to try and come up with a product that can capitalize on the fan base. So it's opportunistic. The considerations are always opportunistic, looking at it from a commercial perspective, basically. And partnerships are much easier if it's partnering with popular brands or strong brands already.
Strong brand.
Yeah.
Or something of prestige, I guess.
Yeah, so it's a win-win situation basically in that sort of co-branded environment.
Okay. John, I've got a question for you again. Now, Malaysia has 6 major cultural festivals, okay? Namely Chinese New Year, Hari Raya, Gawai, Kaamatan, Deepawali, and Christmas. Many brands produce print advertisements, television commercials, and short videos to impart a story that espouses the brand's values. How effective are these for the brand?
Festive advertising has been around for a long time, right? All around the world. I think it's a lot more in Malaysia because of the different ethnicities and cultures and religions and so forth. So, overall, I think it's good because festive time is a time of reflection, a time of joy, a time of family togetherness. So for brands to associate themselves by saying, we feel you, we understand how you're feeling, and we want to be part of your celebration, I think it's terrific. Okay? So I think it's really good to have festive ads. However, to be truly effective, I think it's important to start looking for some meaningful insights, things that matter to people, considering where we are today. Right? So even in your festive messaging, some will send festive messages, some will have specials on offer during festivities, some will have messages of great family gatherings together, others will talk about safety during the period. But I think, to talk about connecting your message to what matters to people right now is also important. Right? And I'll give you an example, one that caught my attention, right? And this was done by a group of students from a college. It was Taylor's College. It was about it was a Deepawali TV commercial, or was a video, a Deepawali film, and it was about a kid who was very curious. I think they call it Curious Kumar. That's the name of the film. And so in a journey in a car, he started asking some questions about, and he said, and some difficult questions, right? He said, how come there is Chinese New Year songs, Hari Raya songs on air, there's no Deepawali songs? And the parents didn't know what to say, right? Then he drove past and he saw a house for rent. And there was a sign outside that said, for rent, no Indians. Right? How does the parents answer that? Then he went on and he said, how come there's one day of public holiday for Deepawali and there's 2 for Chinese New Year and two for Hari Raya, and other festivities, right? Yeah. So some difficult questions, but you know what? And finally, there was one that made me laugh. He said he was looking at a product that says "Fair is beautiful." It was a cosmetic product. He said, "Does that mean I'm not beautiful?" Wow, the curiosity of a young child, a young kid, innocent curiosity, no agenda, just innocent curiosity. And I thought it was great because curiosity is at the core of teaching and learning, right? It's about being curious all the time, questioning, being curious, and not just reading and accepting and going on. So I thought from a purpose, if you want to use a soundbite, I thought it was so well connected to that. So the parents were getting really upset by these questions because they were difficult questions, right? How do you answer to a kid who's only 5, 6, or how old he was, right? So he went to his sister and he said, you know, am I being a nuisance by asking all this? And I tell you, her answer was so epic. That's what made this so powerful. And she said, you know, questions are like the lights. They can burn. But don't lose faith, kiddo. Stay with the light or keep the light, right? Something along those lines. I thought it was very powerful. Deepavali ad or commercial or video because it connected with some truths out there at that time. It connected with curiosity of a kid, and it was ideal for a group of students to come up with those insights and develop something that matters, right? So I thought it was very powerful. So I'm sure there are many more like that, right? So what I'm saying is that festive ads or videos are great, but if they are grounded in some real insights, some real things that matter, they become even more powerful. Because it is a time of reflection. For all festivities, time of reflection. It's a time to have messages like that really make a difference. So congratulations to this group of students who made this. I believe it's in-house in Taylor's.
Mm-hmm. You know, John, you mentioned about brand trying to connect with it, with the people basically. So, Rudy, you're talking about AirAsia. I think was it yesterday or the day before? I was reading about your boss on a bike, and he said that those with the big loyalty points could get a 50% off on. So, okay, that's an ancillary business of AirAsia. I've got a question, okay. In recent years, AirAsia has explored supplementary and or ancillary businesses, for example, with Santan ASEAN being one. Does this seem opportunistic or will it dilute the AirAsia brand equity?
That's a good question, and honestly speaking, it's something that I've always had a discussion about internally, like how should we really be growing the reach of the brand. And the one thing about Santan that's interesting is that if you ask anyone if they're familiar with the Santan brand and you say Pak Nasir's Nasi Lemak, the first thing they'll say is, oh yeah, AirAsia in-flight food, which is good for us because then in terms of equity, like you're saying, people already relate Santan to the AirAsia brand. So it helps us in terms of that reach and continues to grow our equity in a different sense for the larger group. But having said that, the challenge for us then is also because we're growing this new brand and product on ground, how do we convince people that Santan isn't just in-flight food? You're not going to the fast food restaurant at Mid-Valley, for example, and you're going to be served in-flight food. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have as a brand, and I think it ties back to AirAsia in terms of quality and trust and also value. The whole idea behind Santan is to be the first fast food chain of ASEAN food. If you're familiar with what AirAsia always champions, we always champion the Southeast Asian region.
Yes.
So that's something that we are really trying to go after. So in terms of it being something that actually dilutes our brand, I actually think it helps us kind of grow beyond the audience that we are normally speaking to. Because now you're going from just your typical travel demographics or people who fly with us to people who are just walking in shopping malls and all that. And it gives us an opportunity to also cross-sell the rest of our brands across the group in those outlets. So for example, we have big loyalty points like you were mentioning earlier on. Rather than people just redeeming points or earning points from flights, they can now do it at the Santan store as well. And then in the future, you can earn and burn at all these places that we are kind of expanding across the entire space actually. So that's why we're going into multiple industries, if you can see over the past year.
Talking of multiple industries, Adam, okay? With the pandemic forcing various degrees of movement control order throughout the world, fintech has seen rapid acceleration in emergence of new companies and growth of existing companies. How can financial institutions that are established brands over decades and centuries stay relevant, especially with millennials and the Gen Z?
That's a good question, Prabha. I think I want to distinguish a couple of things here from the question. Firstly, I think the rise of the fintech has been around for the past 10 years, and it's largely driven by technology, obviously. The pandemic accelerated adoption to quite a number of technology companies, basically, not just fintech alone. And fintech was actually an opportune time because of the whole fear of COVID and people wanting to go cashless. And the fintech that you see that are predominant in the market are mostly wallets. And wallets are actually quite general in terms of its use case out there. So it's very easy for a lot of fintech, given their rapid deployment, to actually come into the space and deliver wallets basically that will enable this cashless transaction for customers at that time. And banks have not really gone much in this space. Not that banks have not invested in staying relevant and staying in competition with fintech. The way to see it is look at it as an ecosystem. So the wallets have a role to play, and traditional, conventional banks still has a role to play in people's life as well. Because wallets fulfill perhaps the front-end relationship when customers are trying to transact cashless with merchants, for example. So it's a medium. It's a little bit like the wallet we carry. You can carry a branded wallet, you can carry a non-branded wallet, but what's important is what you have in a wallet. So your credit card, your identity, your cash, etc. So the electronic wallet is the same thing. So the brand is really not that important, but what you put in there is going to be important. And that will inevitably be banks involved there. So you still have to transfer money from the banks to your wallet, right? So traditional banks are still in the game in that sense, as far as enabling this economy that's happening right now, right? Whether you link your debit card or whether you link your credit card, we are in the game in that sense. And in that sense that the role is actually complementary to a large extent. Now, where have banks actually invested in terms of staying relevant to consumers are really in the areas that are a little bit more fundamental to their core business. So I mentioned earlier the multiple levels of relationship that you have with the bank, from a very utility level, as in having a basic deposit account, to a more entrenched sort of relationship, as in having a relationship manager with the bank, for example. And somewhere in between that, you will find that convenience plays a very important role, as in convenience, as in providing online banking. So online banking has been around for a long time, right? And online banking has also evolved to actually have more and more functionalities. So those days you can check your balance and you can actually transfer money. And now you can pay bills, you can do a number of things, or even invest in investment products online. So you can actually do quite a lot of things now with online banking. And that's where banks have actually invested quite a fair bit in terms of digitizing the bank to make sure that it's able to stay relevant to its customers, because its customers' needs are a lot more diverse than what the fintech are going for. So if you look at it from a segment perspective, and you have to look, you have to try to visualize life stage. So where are the wallets catering to? Which segments are the wallets catering to? So they're catering to a lot of the new jobbers, the students, for example, just about anybody who is trying to transact cashless. But when you go higher up in terms of your needs, in terms of financial products, you find that there's a lot more absence of fintechs playing there. So like the lending products. Yes, there's a lot of lending fintechs around the world, but in terms of scale of lending, in terms of how much is out there in the market, it's not to the scale of traditional banks. One day, maybe there will be, if the fintechs can actually raise the level of capital that will enable them to do lending, and if they're able to get sophisticated in risk management and compliance, etc., then they may be able to play in that game. But that is a very costly business proposition to actually get into, which banks have actually invested in for decades, for example. Right? So those areas are still pretty much entrenched in terms of preserving the relationship with customers and making sure that there is continuity in the banking relationship as well. So yes, technology will come in and accelerate adoption of certain services, but there are still other services that are required maybe deeper into the relationship, right? That still requires the sort of establishment that conventional banks bring on board to be able to instill that sort of customer trust. Right? So there is a role for everyone in the game.
Okay, let's say, we talked about relationship. A legacy financial institution brand and a fintech brand, I find that to go and create a bond between the two, I would opt more for a legacy financial institution brand. You see, I feel that it's there. It can deliver my needs. Would that be correct to a point, or am I wrong?
Correct to a certain point. It depends on which generation you are.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's
right. So
that's your age actually.
So your age is showing, Prabha. I think this is the issue of brand fragility. So we are in an era today where brands can become really big overnight.
Yes.
And we've seen many examples of that case. And if you compare AirAsia and Coca-Cola, for example, right? I mean, Coca-Cola is how many 100 over years old brand? And then suddenly you have an AirAsia which is able to, really ramp up its brand value in that sense, right? In a shorter span of time. And now you also have technology brands like the Grabs of the world, for example, or Facebook or Google, who are like the biggest, most valuable companies and brands in the world, right? And their existence in the market has been a much shorter period, for example, than most of the established brands. And this has a lot to do with the evolution of the consumer space as well, right? So without going too much into that review of generational divide and differences,
thank you very much.
A lot of it has to do with which generation you belong to. The younger generation will find it very, very easy to accept new brands, right? Because they are so engaged with technology, and everything that they download and everything that they're exposed to are basically at the same time of exposure as established brands. In fact, if you think about engagement time with the brands, the young generation actually has more time engaged with new brands than old brands, right? So if you go back to the principle of brand building, that you need to build brand over time, it's true to some degree, except that it's accelerated here because they spend so much time with the new brands, much longer time than the old brands. And a lot, of course, this is all contextual as well. So to some degree, yes, the new brands are able to build a stronger relationship with the new generations because of that. So time is still important in that sense. Whereas some of us here in the room, Rudy not included, we probably have a stronger affinity with the older brands because we have spent a lot of time with those brands, right? More so than the time we spend on the new brands because we are maybe a little bit less engaged with technology to some degree, right? So that's really what it's all about, basically.
I think I just want to pick up on that point because I think it's interesting. You talk about technology and brand evolution and brand growth, and particularly in this day and age where brands can grow faster. I think one thing we have to recognize is that if given space and time, brands in this current day and age with technology can grow really, really fast. What I think is limiting all that would be regulations. And some of the regulatory shackles, I think contains a lot of the ability for brands to innovate faster.
Good. You've just dovetailed to the question which I wish to go and ask you. Okay?
Okay.
In the tobacco category, where almost globally restrictions apply in above the line and below the line marketing and promotion, the challenge is to be innovative. Being a product that is legal and permissible to be sold, how can brands in the tobacco category maintain loyalty?
By being innovative, I think that's the thing. So there is obviously a view that highly regulated industries like the tobacco industries, and the thing that people see is that it is being impacted by regulations, but there continues to be space to be allowed to innovate. What is crucial, I think, is that level of control, and that applies to various other industries. There is, we call it a slippery slope situation where the tobacco industry has always been highly regulated, and some of these regulations are pretty advanced compared to other industries. We discussed just now about plain packaging. Like if you can imagine other industries, whether it be soft drinks or whatever, going into generic packaging, or worst case, if airlines have to go into generic packaging, where does innovation sit there? And we all, as brand owners, invest a lot in branding, in getting that loyalty in products, etc. When a product is then commoditized, there's a commoditization of this whole thing. Then the only thing you can play with is price, and that has an effect indeed on the economy as well, because that may pull back investments into branding and brand building, etc.
Azrani, you mentioned about investing in brand building. Okay. In September this year, it was reported that for every 10 sticks sold in Malaysia, 6 are contraband, meaning that 60% of the market is illicit. Okay. How much damage does this market scenario inflict on a brand, especially since that image took decades upon decades to cultivate?
It's very damaging. Certainly, because it's not just damaging to the brand itself, but to the category and industry. When people talk about the tobacco industry now, people think that everything is the same. Right. Whereas there's a very distinct difference between what is a legal brand and an illegal brand, where regulatory measures are not followed, taxes are not paid for. So it is definitely damaging. But I think what would be more damaging is when people bypass or are able to bypass regulations very easily. And those who are actually compliant and put all the investments in there, it disincentivizes actually companies from actually spending more and innovating and investing in brands and in the things that is associated with the category. So I just coming back to generalize some of these issues. If you can imagine, I would think, and Rudy may know better, that Asia, if given the chance and space, would want to go, wherever, whenever, do many other things. And I know the airline industry is highly, highly regulated, geographically, so be restricted by geopolitical situations. I'm sure Tony Fernandez will want to have an AirAsia in almost every country that he could. But that's not possible, and that's all due to regulations. And again, banking as well. You need a license to bank. But now, with the brands that are there, you are seeing a lot of other companies who aspire to be banks, only restricted by the fact that you need a license, you need to be regulated. If you can imagine where all these regulations are, loosen up, and I think there will be more innovation and brand development that can come into play, and that can only help the economy. I think particularly so right now, within the period of COVID, where capital may be tight. You need to allow for brands to actually flourish and free.
And every country is fighting for investment now.
Correct.
So if the brands are reluctant to invest because of certain restrictions.
Well, I think brand owners will look at where you can invest and where you can get the biggest returns. But naturally, when you invest, you also want to see how fast those investments will be realized, but how fast your business objectives can also be realized. And one of the biggest limitations to all this is actually bureaucracy. administrative burdens, and just adds to the cost of doing business. And and that goes back to the branding of a particular country. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of industry issues and chambers as well. And one of the problems and things that we've always asked the government to look at is the brand of the country itself. Right now, we have a lot of uncertainty in regards to because of COVID, and we're fighting for that space and the investments coming from from various countries. But where do we sit? How do we compare with the Vietnams of the day, the Singapores of the day? Where are we? What is our unique selling proposition here? That still needs to be I think settled, to be very clear in thinking where we want to be. So it's branding. I think bottom line, branding is everywhere. It's not just different industries, but even geographically, brands are important, and how you position branding is very key.
John, as AZRANI said, talking about geographically and around the world, how brands are positioned. Okay. Having been around since 1938, not you, but IAA is the oldest organization. I really choked there. Okay, IAA is the oldest organization for the marketing communications industry with members throughout the world. With the ability to draw on resources from its wide network, how is IAA assisting brands to elevate and cement reputation with consumers?
Sure. I think in the midst of this pandemic, which has stymied the global economy, we all know that, right? And nobody is being left out of this. We believe that brands can foster economic revival. It can be an engine for economic revival because brands foster pride, they foster passion, they foster trust, choice, identity, familiarity. These are things that drive consumers and give them confidence, right? So I can talk a little bit about what Malaysia is doing. So recently, what we did, as you can see in some of these posters here, we developed a campaign on We Love Brands to reassure the consumers that brands are still there and they can do the right thing for you. So that's a campaign on We Love Brands. And we started with the first one, which is on a world without brands is a world without pride, right? And so if you look at the juxtaposition of the Malaysian flag in white with Malaysia written on it, and on the right with all its true colors and stripes, it does tell you that brands can foster pride and confidence. Right? And the second one we developed was brands without a world without brands is a world without passion. Right? So it's a football season that's coming out, and football is all about emotion and passion and everything that it brings. So once again, you see on the left, you see a team in white, and on the right, you see a team in its true colors and numbers and all the icons that go with it, that really just foster the emotion and passions of people. And the third one is a world without brands is a world without trust. Right? And so this is a very localized version of that. If you look at one, you have a sign saying Lebuh Raya Highway, and on the right you have a unbelievably identifiable symbol of familiarity and trust of the highway symbol, because you're on it, you know you're on the right road, and you know you're going to get somewhere safely. You drive safely. Yeah, so that's a campaign that was launched. And right now, this trust one will be in January. We just did the passion in December, keeping up with the football season. And last month we did the pride. So this will continue, and we're right now in the process of converting this to Bahasa, so we can go to press, as well as press doesn't necessarily need Bahasa, but certainly outdoor does. So as we speak, people are working on how best to convert this, and we're looking for all the help we can get. I mean, obviously, if brands want to donate or contribute some of their airtime towards airing this, because it's in the interest of the industry and interest of brands, we're happy to have this being amplified out there through different mediums. And I know we have some airtime owners, outdoor airtime owners, have shown interest to want to contribute some of their airtime to it as well, right? So that's what we're doing right now. Now, all of this is leading into a very important event in 2022, which is the 46th IAA World Congress. And the World Congress is the largest combination of marketing and communications professionals around the world. I'm pleased to say that IAA Malaysia has got the rights to run the Congress in 2022. It's the first time ever for Malaysia.
Oh, that's
right?
wonderful.
Yeah. And so, again, with our sponsors and partners, we're starting to plan towards the Congress. Now, the theme of the Congress is also equally an exciting theme, and it simply says recode. Creativity and technology for better world, better lives, better world. So recode your reason for being, recode your brand, your business towards creativity and technology for better lives and a better world for all. And so we're very excited about this, and this is a lead up to the World Congress in 2022. So that's what we're doing in Malaysia, as well as these webinars we're running. This 3-part webinar we're running right now is part of a lead up to that as well.
Okay, it seems like we've got a couple of questions that have come up. Okay, here's one. Would you say that in Malaysia it's too sensitive for adverts to employ humor as compared to creative in Thai TV commercials? Rudy?
Not at all, I don't think so. Especially now, because a lot of advertising is predominantly done through social media and YouTube, OTTs and all these kind of things, right? I think humor has always been a part of culture no matter where you go. And personally, I'm a believer of popular culture. And in my opinion as well, it's the most important culture of today, because popular culture tells you about the past, the present, and also what's going to happen in the future, because it's all about trends. And humor is a big part of that. And I honestly speaking, I don't think it's a big issue in Malaysia in terms of sensitivities. I think there are other parts that are more sensitive when it comes to advertising, but humor, I don't think it's an issue. I mean, obviously Thailand, it's more because of, I guess, slapstick humor. I think a lot of us know in Thailand, the ads are amazing.
Yes.
It's just in the different countries that you go through, that you go to, they all have a different way of expressing that humor.
Okay.
Do you think there's a red line in terms of the humor we can deploy here versus?
Definitely, but I mean, being AirAsia, right? Personality, we have we'll try and kind of go over the red line a little bit, push it a bit.
Push the boundaries, right?
But
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, to be very honest, there have been times when we've been given like a slap on the wrist because you guys have gone a bit too far. But when we look at the comments and then we see the fans and the public actually looking at what has been said against us, everybody's actually more supportive than against us. So it comes back to regulations as well. I think it's again one of those things where if things loosen up a bit, then things will become a lot simpler for a lot of brands, I guess.
Okay. Adam, I've got a question for you. Can new successful brands fade away as quickly as they come? Okay. Could they just be part of a fad? Consumers today are fickle and less loyal to brands. This is a question that's been posed.
I think the short answer to that is most certainly yes. If you can actually become very successful in a short time, you can also equally fail. I spoke a bit about brands being fragile, and that fragility is basically driven by a couple of things. It's again down to fundamentals, right? So if you actually misrepresent yourself to the customers, you may have built up the trust quickly, but then you start to fail the customer's trust, then you will certainly fall. Or if the customers like you and have certain expectations, which was actually built up in a very short span of time, but then you start to fail in terms of the experience that you're giving to the customers, then again it will fall. So delivery is very important for any brands, regardless of whether you are an established brand or whether you are a new brand. For all brands, your proposition has got to be clear. You have to know who your customers are, and you have to be genuine to them. And you have to be true in terms of what you promise to deliver. And the experience that you promise the customers as well is something that you have to live up to. any failure in any one of these, you'll find that the customers will be very unforgiving in today's era because of the speed of communication. In those days, you file a complaint, you have to try and reach the call center, write a letter, mail it, or try to call in the call center and all that. But today, one post on social media, an email, and you're in trouble as a brand. Right? So you have to understand that brands operate in an era where things are very fragile. As much as you can actually build up your brand really fast because of technology, you can also fail very fast because you have actually misrepresented yourself or you have failed in terms of delivery to the customers.
John, taking on what Adam has said, there's a question here, okay, which is quite relevant. How does one repair damage done to a brand?
Well, I think Adam talked about being genuine, right? And one of the parts of being real and genuine is admit when you've made a mistake. All right? If you have said something or done something that has damaged the brand, and if you have fully internalized it, then admit it and say it was a mistake. All right? I mean, things happen, right? And I think it's very important to do that. And I think we all here have AirAsia has admitted mistakes they've made, but they've outwardly said it was a mistake, right? And we've learned from it and we move on. I'm sure other industries have as well. But I think the other thing is this, a lot of brands or companies have kind of textbook, well-articulated, soundbite purpose statements, right? We got to get away from this, right? These well-articulated statements of purpose may not be connecting with what matters right now. You got to be agile, and you got to make sure it connects with what matters to people.
I mean, there's no one size that fits all.
No, I don't think so. And I think you've got to be connected to what matters to people. For example, as I said earlier, I mean, the oceans matter, the planet matters, the environment matters, nature matters, especially what we've just gone through. All of these matters, and brands need to be able to say, how do we internalize this, not just as a soundbite statement, but really internalized within our organization so that every part of our business is delivering against these values, right? And I think that's important. That's how brands will recover. Now, people will forgive, right? I know that consumers will forgive. If you make a mistake, you do the wrong thing. As long as you are genuine, you admit you did it, and this is how you're repairing it, you always get a second chance, right? But if you don't do it genuinely and purposefully, then it's a hard road from there.
AZRANI, I've got one for you. Okay, says here, when you're an up and coming brand but smaller than the incumbents, how do you break into the clutter? How do you be more relevant than your competitors if you're a new brand?
Well, obviously, I think innovation will be a key factor. Agility, speed as well. Again, understanding the current scenarios. Sometimes, the classic case of the big organization, the mammoth, body that sometimes is held back internally by its own bureaucracies in terms of innovating. The new player on the block can move faster. So those kind of things will play a role. But I think also what John said just now about brand damage is also something interesting. It's one thing that you have a self-inflicted damage where you've done something wrong, right? More importantly, I think it's also where some brand damage is done by external factors such as coming back, governments or regulation, which is why it's very crucial to get that balance right. I think it's also important that the ecosystem and also the environment and where, in this case, governments, particularly in fragile situations where economies are uncertain, that brand protection has to be foremost and top of mind. Given that people may be looking for value, or there will be illegal segments maybe coming in, or further controls or regulations that are coming. But because once an external damage done to brands, and there's no coming back from that, I guess, unless you've done your own damage. You can say sorry about it, but if it's impacted by regulations, it's not that easy to straightforward. So protection in that part is very key.
Adam, one last question, sorry.
So I just wanted to segue and add on to that, right? Whilst we say that we should the recovery of from a mistake in the marketplace is to acknowledge, but we also have to bear in mind, and this also stems from regulations, is that brands have an obligation to get it right most of the time, and that's expected by customers. And therefore, understanding of the regulations in the sector that you operate in is of utmost importance. So I think regulations are there to protect customers to a large degree. It's not so much to restrict operations, but it's really there to protect customers. And I think if you stay true to that understanding, then you should try as much as possible to operate in a way that will actually not fail customers as much as possible. That's the obligation of brands and brand owners as well. We don't have the luxury of trying things out too much and committing mistakes on behalf of the brand, because it's not us. The brand is much bigger than any one of us who are custodians of brands in that sense. So we must have that extra care to actually make sure that we know all the rules, we understand the regulations, we understand customer expectations, and as much as possible, get it right most of the time, right?
Yeah, I think that duty of care, extends to, right now, if we look at what's happening, I think the pandemic has given renewed fuel to the illicit trade, right? And I've had multiple experience through multiple categories, not just in one or two. I think brands have a duty of care to say, a lot of that is outside my control. It's the value chain goes this far, and after that it's out of my hands. No, the brands have a responsibility to make sure that the authenticity of products and services under my brand is there when it reaches the consumer, all right? Tough job, I know, because you don't have control over a lot of elements, and that's why brands got to go the extra step of doing all the engagements and all the things that have to be done to stop this illicit trade.
Okay, I've got one interesting question here, and this is not a product or a service, but it's a major brand. It's one of the world's biggest brands. The United States is a standard bearer for democratic systems of government. How has Trump's post-election antics damaged brand America? Rudy, you're the youngest. Could you give your take on it?
No, I just got two words: popular culture.
Popular culture.
I mean, if you think about it now, like, I hate to say this, and I have friends who are Americans as well, but they've essentially turned them, well, not they, but he has essentially turned America as a brand into a meme.
Right.
So if you look across social media nowadays, there's so many things that people can do with Donald Trump's image or what has happened post-election that can just become a way for them to just communicate frustrations, communicate how they feel right now and so on. And this doesn't even have to tie to America's situation. It could be their own personal feelings, but they're using America as a way to communicate it. So in that sense, obviously there's some damage done there. And the age-old saying, once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet.
Yes, yes.
So, they've essentially turned themselves into a meme.
Adam, okay, how has Trump's post-election antics damaged brand America? Your take.
Again, I think it's not just about popular culture, but it really depends on the intent and purpose in the first place, right? What is brand America supposed to be? And if Trump is anything that is not part of that structure, then it has damaged brand America to a large extent. So it is not about the noise that you generate out there. It is not about how popular you are representing the brand America, but it's really about what is it that America stands for. And is that Trump or is that not Trump?
Okay.
All right. So I think it's divided in that sense. Obviously, Trump has been popular and is popular enough to become the president.
Yep.
So obviously, it's a divided view as to what Americans think should represent America to that extent. But who are we to say we are Malaysians?
I agree. Okay, that's true. John, Adam said that, okay, we are Malaysians. Okay, you spent quite a bit of time in the States. Okay, both during your working career and also post-working career. What are your comments on that, or your take on this?
You know, the last 4 years has brought out a lot of things in people. Maybe some of things were hidden things, but it has come out, and it has created a divided America. And that does sadden me, that even though I don't live there, I have my children who live there, and it saddened me that it's a divided America. And you know, rather than unifying America, there seems to have been no real effort at unifying it. And that the people who look at it from the outside, who respect America because of everything it stands for, good and bad, and now saying, is this division or that exists right now, is this what the country needs? And from that perspective, I wonder whether, I don't have to wonder, I mean, the level of respect has declined. So if there's a brand ranking of America in a ranking terms, I think it's dropped in its brand ranking.
AZRANI, do you have any take on that? How his post-election antics has damaged brand America?
I think that's an interesting, because you mentioned post-election
Yes,
antics.
post-election, yes.
Yeah, well, it's probably part of the, I would say it's part of the brand evolution. And we know the man is like that. We know what we probably would have expected somewhat before the election results came out, that something like this would have happened. But you know, it could be part of the whole evolution if as expected, things change after January 20th. And that becomes an opportunity to reset the branding and maybe, you know, bring it back onto a much more positive trajectory. So then again, this is human history here, and it's also decided by populist ideology as well as the votes. So some people say it is what it is. It has been what it has been. But it's part of the history, and more importantly, where do they go next? I think that's going to be key.
Rudy, I've got, this is the last question, and I think you are best to answer. What about the public perception that customer service by many brands has become too automated and non-personalized? Online bots, generic answers. Why are many brands not too concerned about this? Is that true, or?
I think it's partial. It really depends on the industry as well. Obviously, with AirAsia, I think we've moved. But we've moved into having a chatbot as well. And yes, I know there are some people who have grievances with it and so on. But at the same time, I think the personality of AirAsia, again, like I said, we've always been people-centric. So outside of that, when consumers actually have their interaction with us on the ground or in the plane and so on, we ensure that that personal touch is still there, right? That we're still very much a human that you're speaking to and interacting with. And again, I think it comes back to the industry you're in as well. I mean, personally for me, I've obviously had engagements with customer services from banks and customer services from telcos and so on. For me, for a bank, I mean, to a certain extent, I actually feel fine to have an automated chatbot for some reason, because I feel like with a bank, it's a very straightforward thing that I just need to get this done, or why can't I log in or whatnot. Whereas with a telco, especially for me, like I'm so hooked onto my phone. I know this is not a good thing, but it's because of the fact that I need my phone for everything that I do. Right. And if there's an issue there, I need somebody to be able to solve it for me immediately. Somebody can speak to, because even for me to access what I do on my bank, I need my telco to work, right? So I think it depends on the industry where that human touch is required. And again, I think that's why I say it's kind of a half and half. Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think, it's exactly about an hour plus. Adam Wee, thank you very much.
Thank
Johnny
you.
Rustam, thank you. Rudy KHAW and John CHACKO, thank you very much.
Prabha. Thank you. Thank you all.
To all of our participants from around the world, thank you very much for attending and participating in IAA Malaysia's webinar series, Brands Matter. Thank you.